Cover my nephew's college expenses right now. My brother Marcus ordered slamming a $20,000 invoice down onto my glass coffee table. He demanded I pay for the dorms, the new laptop, and the premium meal plan. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Not happening." A week later, I overheard him tell our mother not to worry. He said that after the big Christmas dinner, I would be forced to pay. Mom nodded and replied that acting as the family safety net was my only real role anyway. So I changed the plans completely. On December 20th, they went absolutely crazy when I dropped a bombshell that destroyed their entire wealthy facade. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to entitled family members who completely underestimated your worth. My name is Maya. I am 32 years old, living in the heart of Atlanta. To the outside world, my family is the absolute picture of African American excellence. My father is a highly respected pastor with a massive congregation, and my mother treats her social standing like a full-time job. They practically worship the ground my older brother Marcus walks on. Marcus is 36, a vice president of wealth management at a top firm, and the undisputed golden child of our family. I, on the other hand, am the designated disappointment. Years ago, I dropped out of college because I could not stand the suffocating pressure of their expectations. They wanted me to be a lawyer or a doctor, someone they could brag about at their exclusive country club dinners. Instead, I started a crisis public relations firm. They think I spend my days cleaning up messy scandals for local rappers and reality television stars. They call me a glorified internet janitor. What they do not know is that my PR firm was just a stepping stone. I used the capital from those early days to quietly build a logistics and transportation empire that now covers 6 states. I am a millionaire several times over, but I keep my lifestyle deliberately low-key to avoid their greedy eyes. I live in a beautiful but understated loft. I do not wear flashy designer labels around them. I let them believe I am just scraping by because it is easier than dealing with their constant demands for money and judgment. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when the illusion of our family peace finally shattered. I was sitting in my living room reviewing quarterly profit margins on my laptop when the front door flew open. Marcus and his wife Chloe barged in without even knocking. Chloe is 34, white, and runs a high-end fashion boutique in Buckhead. She is the kind of woman who looks down her nose at anyone who does not summer in the Hamptons. She has always acted like marrying into our prominent family was some sort of charitable act on her part. Marcus stomped right past my entryway mat, tracking wet footprints onto my hardwood floor. He was wearing a custom-tailored suit that probably cost more than my first car. Chloe trailed closely behind him, clutching a rare Himalayan Birkin bag that retailed for at least $15,000. She looked around my comfortable but modest living room with a familiar expression of utter disgust, as if the very air in my apartment was beneath her standards. Marcus did not even bother with a hello. He marched straight up to my coffee table and threw down a thick stack of papers. The top sheet was a printed invoice from Duke University. "I need you to cover Jordan's freshman year expenses," Marcus stated, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he used on his junior employees. "The tuition is handled, but we need $20,000 for his housing, the premium campus meal plan, and a top-of-the-line MacBook Pro. I need the money transferred to my account before Friday." I stared at the piece of paper, then slowly looked up at my brother. I genuinely thought he was making some sort of twisted joke. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "You broke into my home to hand me a bill for your son's college expenses." Marcus crossed his arms, looking down at me with absolute arrogance. "It is not a bill, Maya. It is your contribution to the family. I am closing a massive real estate deal next month, and all my liquid assets are tied up in escrow. You are single, you have no children, and you have no real responsibilities. It is the least you can do." Before I could even process the sheer audacity of his demand, Chloe chimed in. She adjusted her designer coat and offered me a condescending, pitying smile. "Honestly, Maya, you should be thanking us for the opportunity," Chloe said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. Jordan is going to Duke. He is securing the family legacy. Since you chose to drop out of college and clean up trashy media scandals for a living, this is really your only chance to add some actual value to the family name. You cannot contribute prestige, so you should at least contribute financially. I sat there in silence for a long moment, letting her insulting words hang in the air. They honestly believed I owed them this. They looked at me, a woman they considered a failure, and demanded my hard-earned money to fund their luxurious facade. I looked at Marcus, the supposed financial genius, making $300,000 a year. Then I looked at Chloe standing there holding a purse that cost nearly as much as the bill they were demanding I pay. Let me get this completely straight, I began, my voice calm but laced with ice. You, a vice president of wealth management bringing home a massive six-figure salary, and your wife, who is currently clutching a $15,000 handbag, are standing in my living room demanding that I pay for your son's dorm room. Marcus bristled, his face tightening with anger. Do not turn this into a debate about my finances. Chloe's bag is an investment piece, and my salary goes toward maintaining the lifestyle this family requires. You have been scraping by for years, and Mom and Dad have always turned a blind eye to your embarrassing career. We are giving you a chance to prove you are not totally useless. I stood up slowly, matching his height as best as I could. I picked up the invoice from the table and held it out to him. Not happening, I said flatly. Marcus glared at me, refusing to take the paper. What did you just say? I said no. I am not giving you $20,000. I am not funding your son's meal plan, and I am certainly not buying him a laptop while your wife wears my annual rent on her arm. If you are so desperate for cash, maybe Chloe should sell her investment piece. Chloe gasped loudly, pressing a hand to her chest as if I had just physically struck her. Marcus stepped closer, his physical presence looming and aggressive. He pointed a finger directly in my face. You listen to me, he snarled. You do not get to disrespect my wife, and you do not get to say no to this family. You are a college dropout who spends her days begging blogs not to post terrible pictures of D-list celebrities. You are a stain on this family's reputation. I am the one who makes Mom and Dad proud. I am the one pulling the weight. You will transfer that money by Friday, or I swear to God I will make sure Mom and Dad cut you out of this family for good. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply dropped the invoice onto the floor, right onto the wet footprints he had tracked into my home. The door is exactly where you left it, I told him, pointing toward the exit. Get out of my house, and do not ever demand things that do not belong to you. Marcus stared at me with pure hatred. He grabbed Chloe by the arm and stormed toward the door. As he yanked it open, he threw one last look over his shoulder. You are going to regret this, Maya, he spat. You are going to pay that money. I will make sure of it. The door slammed shut, rattling the picture frames on my wall. I stood alone in the quiet of my apartment, my heart pounding a steady, furious rhythm against my ribs. They thought they could walk all over me. They thought my refusal was just a minor inconvenience that they could bully out of me. But they had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with. They thought I was just a lowly publicist scraping by in the shadows of their elite Atlanta social circle. They did not know about my corporate accounts. They did not know about my logistics empire. And most importantly, they did not know that their arrogant little stunt had just ignited a war that I was fully equipped to win. The ringing of the smartphone sliced through the heavy silence left in the wake of Marcus and Chloe's dramatic exit. Maya stood perfectly still in the center of her living room, her eyes fixed on the wet footprints her brother had left on the pristine hardwood. The phone buzzed relentlessly against the glass surface of the coffee table. She did not need to look at the screen to know exactly who was calling. Marcus had barely made it to the elevator before dialing their mother to complain. Maya took a slow, deliberate breath, smoothing the invisible wrinkles from her tailored trousers before reaching down to pick up the device. The caller ID flashed the name Vivian in stark white letters. Maya answered the call, pressing the phone to her ear without saying a word. She knew better than to offer a greeting. Maya, what on earth is this nonsense your brother is telling me right now? Vivian's voice came through the speaker. It was smooth-cultured and laced with the kind of absolute authority that only a megachurch pastor's wife possessed. Vivian did not shout. She never had to. She used a tone that demanded immediate compliance, a tone perfected over decades of directing church boards and organizing high society charity galas in Atlanta. He told you that I refused to pay his bills, Maya replied, her voice remarkably steady. Because that is exactly what happened. Do not use that insolent tone with me. Vivian snapped the polished veneer, slipping just a fraction. Your brother is incredibly distressed. He is handling million-dollar portfolios, managing intense stress, and providing for his family. And instead of supporting him, you chose to disrespect him and his wife in your home. Over what? A completely reasonable request to support your own nephew. A reasonable request. Maya repeated the words, feeling a cold knot of disbelief form in her chest. Mom Marcus makes $300,000 a year. Chloe is walking around with a $15,000 handbag. They are asking me to hand over $20,000 for a dorm room and a meal plan. They are not destitute. They are greedy. Vivian exhaled sharply, a sound that communicated profound disappointment. Do not count another man's pockets, Maya. It is unbecoming, and it is entirely unchristian. Marcus has a certain image to maintain. He is a vice president. He moves in circles that require a specific standard of living. His assets are tied up in investments for the future of his family. You, on the other hand, are single. You have no children. You run a little publicity business managing scandals for people who do not know any better. You have the extra cash sitting around doing nothing. Maya closed her eyes for a brief second. The sheer dismissal of her entire life's work was breathtaking. Vivian genuinely believed Maya's crisis management firm was just a frivolous little hobby. She had absolutely no idea about the massive logistics company Maya had built in the shadows, and Maya intended to keep it that way. My money is my own mom. I work hard for it, and I am not an automated teller machine for Marcus every time he overspends on his luxury lifestyle. You are missing the bigger picture, Vivian lectured, her voice dropping into the rhythmic cadence she used when addressing the congregation. We are the Wilsons. We are a pillar of the Atlanta community. Your father has 10,000 souls looking to him for guidance every single Sunday. We project an image of unity of faith and of unwavering family support. When one of us needs help, the others step up. That is what families do. That is what I am supposed to do, you mean? Maya corrected her. Because Marcus has never stepped up for me. When I was starting my business and needed a small loan, he laughed in my face. When I had to move into a terrible apartment because I was broke, you both told me it would build character. But when Marcus needs luxury housing for his son, suddenly it is a family emergency. Vivian's tone turned frigid. It became the voice of a woman who would absolutely destroy anyone who threatened her perfect reality. We did not help you back then because you needed to learn a lesson. You brought that hardship upon yourself. Maya gripped the phone tighter, her knuckles turning white. She knew exactly where this conversation was heading. It was the same weapon her mother had wielded against her for the past 14 years. You embarrassed your father and me. Vivian stated her words, striking like physical blows. When you decided to drop out of university, you made us a laughingstock. Do you have any idea what it felt like to sit at the country club and have the other wives ask me why my daughter could not handle a simple degree? We had planned for you to go to law school. We had told everyone you were going to be an attorney, and you threw it all away because you claimed you were too stressed. You disgraced this family, Maya. You stained our reputation. The silence in the penthouse was absolute, broken only by the sound of Maya's steady breathing. She stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking at the sprawling Atlanta skyline. The city lights were just beginning to flicker on against the darkening sky. Years ago, those words would have reduced her to tears. She would have apologized endlessly, desperate to win back the affection of a mother who only loved conditionally. But the woman standing in the penthouse today was unbreakable. Vivian took Maya's silence as submission and moved in for the final crushing blow. She delivered her verdict with the absolute certainty of a judge handing down a life sentence. There is no room for a selfish daughter in this house. Vivian's voice was hard, cold, and completely devoid of maternal warmth. Marcus is the face of the family. He represents our legacy and our future. Pay for your nephew. That is your role to redeem the disgrace you once caused us. The words hung in the digital space between them. They were not a request, they were a command. Vivian fully expected Maya to crumble to transfer the funds immediately out of a desperate need to cleanse herself of a 14-year-old perceived sin. She expected Maya to accept her designated place at the very bottom of the family hierarchy, existing solely to sacrifice her own resources so the golden child could continue to shine. The camera slowly pushes in, framing Maya's face in a tight extreme close-up. There are no tears in her eyes. There is no trembling in her jaw. Her expression is perfectly still, utterly quiet, and terrifyingly cold. The soft ambient light of the apartment highlights the sharp, unyielding angles of her cheekbones. She looks like a predator realizing that the prey has willingly walked directly into a trap. Maya did not argue. She did not defend her choices. She did not beg for the love that her mother was so blatantly withholding. She simply pulled the phone away from her ear, looked at the active call screen, and firmly pressed the red button. The call disconnected instantly. Maya tossed the phone onto the plush leather sofa. She stood alone in her beautiful, quietly expensive home, the silence rushing back in to fill the space Vivian's toxic words had just occupied. The sheer entitlement of her family was no longer just annoying. It was a disease, a sickness that had allowed them to view her as nothing more than a convenient resource to be drained and discarded. They thought they had her backed into a corner. They thought the threat of being officially cut out of a family that already treated her like dirt would force her hand. Maya walked over to her bar cart and poured herself a measure of dark, aged bourbon. She took a slow sip, feeling the pleasant burn slide down her throat. Her mother wanted her to play a role. Her mother wanted her to pay for Marcus's mistakes to uphold the fake pristine image of the Wilson family. Maya set the glass down. If they wanted a show, she would give them one. But it would not be the redemption story her mother was demanding. It would be a complete and utter demolition. The amber liquid had barely touched my lips when the heavy oak door of my loft shuddered against its hinges. I had not engaged the deadbolt after their dramatic exit. The handle jerked down, and Marcus practically tore the door off its frame, storming back into my home with the force of a hurricane. Chloe trailed right behind him, her phone clutched to her chest, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and malicious excitement. My mother had wasted absolutely no time. "Did you just hang up on our mother?" Marcus bellowed, his voice echoing sharply against the exposed brick walls of my living room. He did not wait for an answer. He crossed the distance between us in 3 long, aggressive strides, stopping right in front of me. He slammed his heavy manicured hand down onto the glass coffee table with a force that made the crystal coasters jump and clatter. The sound was a sharp, violent crack that would have made the old Maya flinch. The new Maya simply took a slow sip of her bourbon, savoring the smoky finish before setting the glass down next to his white knuckles. I ended a conversation that was no longer productive. I replied, my voice dangerously quiet. "And I believe I just told you to get out of my home." Marcus let out a harsh, barking laugh that held zero humor. "Your home. You think this little apartment makes you untouchable. You think because you pay rent on this place, you can suddenly disrespect the people who gave you your last name." He leaned over the table, invading my personal space, his eyes blazing with the kind of entitled fury reserved for people who had never been told no in their entire lives. "You have made a massive mistake today, Maya. If you do not transfer that $20,000 by Friday, I will personally see to it that you lose everything." I crossed my arms, maintaining steady eye contact. "Are you threatening me, Marcus?" "I am making you a promise," he spat, his face inches from mine. "You think you are so independent with your pathetic little transit station. You think running a couple of rusty delivery vans on the south side of town makes you a business owner. I am a vice president of wealth management. I play golf with the city zoning commissioners. I manage the investment portfolios for the largest retail distributors in the entire state of Georgia. One phone call from me, Maya. Just one. And I will dry up every single local contract you have. I will make sure no vendor in Atlanta ever trusts your sad little company with their freight again." Chloe stepped up beside him, her perfectly painted lips curled into a vicious sneer. She looked around my living room, shaking her head as if the mere sight of my independence offended her. Marcus is right, she added, her voice dripping with venom. My clients are some of the most influential women in the state. I will make sure everyone in our social circle knows that your cute little moving service is unreliable and run by an unstable college dropout. You will be bankrupt before the end of the quarter. You will be begging mom and dad to let you move back into their basement. I stood perfectly still, letting their threats wash over me. The sheer blinding ignorance of their words was almost intoxicating. They were threatening to destroy a tiny, struggling courier service that did not even exist anymore. They were completely unaware that the sad little fleet of vans Marcus was mocking had evolved into Empire Logistics, a massive corporate entity with hundreds of commercial trucks, prime real estate warehouses, and federal contracts. They thought they were bullying a helpless younger sister. They had no idea they were standing in the home of a CEO who could buy and sell Marcus's entire wealth management firm before her morning coffee. My father will stand at his pulpit this Sunday. Marcus continued, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper, mistaking my silence for fear. He will preach a sermon about ungrateful children. He will make sure the entire congregation, the entire community knows exactly how selfish you are. You will be a pariah in Atlanta. Your business will be blacklisted. You will have absolutely nothing. Now, are you going to wire the money for Jordan's tuition, or am I going to make that phone call right now? I looked at my brother. I looked at the tailored suit, the expensive watch, the arrogant thrust of his chin. I saw a man who was hollow inside, a man who relied on our parents' prestige and his own inflated sense of self-importance to terrorize anyone he viewed as beneath him. I picked up my bourbon glass and took one final deliberate sip. Then I stepped around the coffee table, closing the distance until I was standing toe-to-toe with him. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. True power never has to shout. Make the call, I said smoothly. Marcus blinked, his aggressive posture faltering for a fraction of a second. What? I said, make the call, Marcus. Pull out your phone right now and call your golfing buddies. Call the zoning commissioners. Call the retail distributors. Tell them to blacklist my company. Do it. He stared at me, his jaw tightening. He was waiting for me to crack, waiting for the tears, the apologies, the desperate pleas for mercy that he was so accustomed to receiving. When my expression remained carved from ice, his face flushed a deeper shade of red. You think I am bluffing? He sneered, reaching into his pocket for his phone. I will ruin you. You cannot ruin what you do not understand. I told him, my voice carrying a lethal calm. You walked into my home, threw a bill for your own son's expenses in my face, and now you are throwing a temper tantrum because the sister you despise refuses to fund your fake, overextended lifestyle. You are pathetic. Chloe gasped, taking a step back. You have lost your mind. No, Chloe, I have finally found my boundaries. I snapped, turning my gaze to her. You both came in here expecting a victim. You expected the insecure college dropout you have been mocking for a decade. But that girl does not exist anymore. I do not care about your country club friends. I do not care about your empty threats. And I certainly do not care about the artificial reputation this family clings to so desperately. I walked past them and marched directly to the front door, pulling it wide open. The cool hallway air rushed into the tense heat of the apartment. I stood by the open door, pointing a steady finger toward the elevator down the hall. Get out, I commanded, my voice echoing with finality. Both of you. Right now. Marcus stood frozen by the coffee table, his chest heaving. He looked at the open door, then back at me, realizing for the first time that his intimidation tactics had completely and utterly failed. The illusion of his absolute control over me had just shattered into a million irreparable pieces. You are dead to this family, Maya, he spat, grabbing Chloe's arm and marching toward the exit. Do not ever come crawling to us when you lose everything. You are entirely on your own. They stepped over the threshold, their faces twisted with a mixture of disbelief and fury. As Marcus opened his mouth to deliver one final desperate insult, I looked him straight in the eyes, stripping away every ounce of sisterly obligation I had ever felt. Don't demand things that don't belong to you. I slammed the heavy oak door shut in his face. The loud, definitive click of the deadbolt sliding into place was the most satisfying sound I had heard in years. I stood in the quiet of my entryway, my heart steady, my mind brilliantly clear. The line had been drawn. The war had officially begun. And as I walked back to my laptop to begin thoroughly investigating the real financial status of my brother's perfect life, I knew exactly how I was going to tear his entire world apart. The clinking of silver against fine bone china and the melodic hum of a live jazz trio masked the absolute rot beneath the surface of the Fellowship Cathedral's grand banquet hall. The Sunday afternoon luncheon was the crown jewel of Atlanta's high society, an exclusive gathering where faith and immense wealth intersected. Here, the Wilson family reigned supreme. The scene unfolds directly over Maya's right shoulder. Her posture is rigid, her silhouette dark and sharp against the blindingly bright, opulent room. Through this narrow, intimate vantage point, the sickening perfection of her family plays out like a perfectly rehearsed stage production. In the center of the room, Reverend Ezekiel Wilson held court. His booming, charismatic laughter echoed off the vaulted ceilings as he clasped the hand of a prominent state senator. Beside him stood Vivian, the flawless matriarch. She wore a tailored ivory suit that probably cost more than a semester of college tuition, her posture radiating pious humility while her eyes cataloged the net worth of every single guest in the room. Maya watched her mother gracefully accept compliments from the adoring congregation. Vivian smiled warmly, touching the arms of elderly church members, projecting the ultimate image of a devoted, loving Christian mother. It was a flawless performance. No one in this room could possibly imagine that less than 48 hours ago, this same woman had cold-bloodedly commanded her daughter to bankrupt herself for the sake of the family brand. Then Marcus and Chloe entered Maya's field of vision. Looking past the sharp curve of Maya's shoulder, Marcus appeared as the quintessential picture of black excellence. He was working the room with aggressive charm, flashing his expensive veneers, patting fellow executives on the back, and playing the role of the humble but wildly successful vice president of wealth management. Chloe clung to his arm, a walking billboard for generational wealth, accepting praise for her philanthropic efforts with a practiced, modest downward glance. But the over-the-shoulder angle captured what the admiring crowd completely missed. It caught the momentary glacial deadness in Marcus's eyes when a lesser-known church member spoke to him too long. It caught the way Chloe covertly wiped her hand with a silk napkin after shaking hands with a woman wearing a cheap, off-the-rack dress. Maya took a slow, silent sip of her sparkling water. She remained completely motionless by the towering marble pillar blending into the shadows of the heavy velvet drapery. She was an invited guest, technically, but she was here strictly for reconnaissance. She needed to see the beast in its natural habitat before she slaughtered it. Marcus turned his head and his gaze locked onto Maya standing in the shadows. For a fraction of a second, the charismatic golden boy mask slipped entirely. Through Maya's perspective, the camera catches the raw, unfiltered malice, twisting Marcus's features. His eyes narrowed into dark, hateful slits. His jaw clenched so hard, the muscles pulsed beneath his skin. But just as quickly as the venom appeared, it vanished. A wealthy donor approached him, and Marcus instantly snapped back into the grinning, gracious sun. Maya did not retreat. She set her glass on a passing waiter's tray and moved deliberately through the crowd, charting a course that would place her directly behind the towering floral arrangement at the center of the VIP tables. She positioned herself perfectly hidden from their direct line of sight, but close enough to hear every single word exchanged at the head table. The distinguished guests briefly vacated the area to greet the arriving mayor, leaving Vivian, Ezekiel, Marcus, and Chloe alone in their private enclave. Maya leaned slightly closer to the fragrant white lilies, her expression unreadable as she listened to the Holy Family drop their righteous facade. "I cannot believe she actually had the audacity to show her face here today," Chloe hissed, her voice a harsh, venomous whisper, completely devoid of her previous southern charm. "After what she did to us on Friday, she should be hiding in that pathetic little apartment of hers." "Keep your voice down, Chloe," Vivian commanded, her tone dropping into a freezing, authoritative register that sent a chill through the air. Smile. The Jenkins family is looking this way. All four of them instantly flashed brilliant, warm smiles toward the crowd, waving gracefully before leaning back into their huddle. She is trying to make a statement, Marcus growled through his perfect, shining teeth. She thinks she can defy us and still walk into this church and eat our food. She thinks she has leverage because she refused to pay for Jordan's tuition. Reverend Ezekiel Wilson, the man who had just preached a powerful sermon about grace, forgiveness, and unconditional love, took a slow sip of his expensive red wine. His voice was cold, calculating, and entirely corporate. We have indulged your sister's rebellious phase for entirely too long, Marcus. I told your mother years ago that allowing Maya to operate that ridiculous little delivery business would only make her arrogant. She has forgotten her place in the hierarchy of this family. She will learn her place by the end of the week, Marcus promised, his voice dripping with cruel satisfaction. I have already set the wheels in motion. Maya held her breath, her eyes tracking the side of her brother's face through the gaps in the flowers. What exactly have you done? Vivian asked, her smile still plastered on her face for the benefit of the onlookers. Marcus leaned in, eager to brag about his destructive capabilities. I made a few phone calls to my contacts at the local commercial bank and the city transport registry. I told them my sister is experiencing a severe mental health crisis and that her tiny logistics company is severely mismanaged. I framed it as a concerned brother looking out for the community. By tomorrow morning, 3 of her main local vendors will suddenly terminate their contracts due to unforeseen liability risks. Chloe let out a soft, wicked giggle, adjusting her diamond necklace. That is brilliant, babe. She will not be able to afford the gas for those rusty old vans she drives around. That is just the beginning. Marcus continued, his chest puffing out with arrogant pride. I also spoke with the commercial real estate broker who manages the lease for her pitiful little warehouse on the south side. He is an old frat brother of mine. He is going to hit her with a sudden massive rent increase disguised as a zoning tax adjustment. She barely makes enough to cover her current overhead. This will suffocate her completely. Excellent work, son, Ezekiel praised, nodding approvingly. A little financial starvation is exactly what it takes to break a stubborn spirit. When her business collapses, she will have no choice but to come crawling back to this family for a handout. And when she does, we will dictate the terms of her surrender. She will pay for Jordan's education, and she will publicly apologize to you and Chloe for her insolence. Vivian gracefully dabbed the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin. Make sure it happens quickly, Marcus. The charity gala is next month, and I will not have Maya's financial embarrassment making us look like we cannot manage our own household. Crush that little business of hers and do it quietly. We maintain our image at all costs. It is as good as done, Mother Marcus smirked, raising his glass in a silent toast. By Friday, Empire Logistics will be nothing more than a bankrupt memory, and Maya will be begging for her old bedroom back. Behind the floral arrangement, Maya stood perfectly still. The over-the-shoulder perspective held steady on the 4 laughing faces of her family. They were clinking their expensive crystal glasses together, toasting to her total annihilation, utterly convinced of their absolute supremacy. Maya did not feel fear. She did not feel the familiar crushing weight of familial betrayal. Instead, a slow, dangerous heat began to spread through her veins. The sheer, blinding arrogance of their conversation was almost laughable. Marcus actually thought she still operated out of a single rundown warehouse on the south side. He actually believed her company relied on 3 local vendors to survive. He had spent the last 5 years so completely absorbed in his own reflection that he had never bothered to look at the financial pages of the national business journals. He had absolutely no idea that Empire Logistics had quietly acquired the very commercial real estate firm his frat brother worked for. He had no clue that her company held federal distribution contracts that dwarfed the entire net worth of the Fellowship Cathedral. They were plotting to starve a lion by taking away a single blade of grass. Maya slowly pulled away from the floral arrangement. She smoothed the front of her designer blazer, her face a mask of absolute terrifying calm. She cast one final glance over her shoulder at the head table. Marcus was currently shaking hands with a prominent Atlanta judge, displaying the perfect picture of Christian morality and familial devotion. Maya turned her back on the grand ballroom and walked silently toward the heavy oak exit doors. Her heels clicked with sharp, rhythmic precision against the marble floor. They wanted a war of attrition. They wanted to use their power to crush her into submission. They had just given her the absolute moral permission to stop holding back. As Maya pushed through the heavy doors and stepped out into the blinding Atlanta sunlight, she pulled her phone from her pocket. She scrolled past the dozens of local contacts and opened her secure encrypted business line. It was time to show Marcus what real unfiltered power actually looked like. It was time to let the monster off the leash. The following Tuesday evening, Maya found herself standing in the cavernous foyer of her parents' sprawling Buckhead estate. She had accepted Vivian's icy, non-negotiable summons to collect a batch of misdirected mail, a trivial errand, clearly designed to force her back into their sphere of influence. The mansion was a monument to the Wilson family brand. Everything was polished marble, imported silk rugs, and towering portraits projecting an illusion of flawless Christian devotion. Maya navigated the silent, suffocating hallways with practiced ease, her footsteps entirely muffled by the thick Persian carpets. She turned the corner toward the west wing, intending to grab her mail from the mahogany credenza outside her father's private study and leave immediately. But as she approached, she noticed the heavy oak doors of the study were cracked open just an inch. A sliver of warm amber light spilled out into the dim corridor, carrying with it the unmistakable sound of ice clinking against crystal. Maya froze her hand, hovering inches from the mail stack. Marcus was inside, his voice carrying that familiar booming arrogance that usually preceded one of his demands. Maya pressed her back against the cool silk wallpaper, holding her breath, completely hidden in the shadows of the hallway. "I am telling you, Mom, she is already panicking," Marcus said, the sheer smugness in his tone making Maya's stomach tighten. "I had my contacts squeeze her little delivery routes, just like we talked about. I guarantee you she is bleeding cash trying to keep those rusty vans on the road. She is stubborn, but she is not stupid. She will break." Maya closed her eyes, maintaining her absolute stillness. Her brother was genuinely convinced his pathetic sabotage attempts were working. He had no idea that her legal team at Empire Logistics had already identified his frat brother contacts and was currently preparing to bury their respective firms in antitrust litigation. Vivian's voice floated through the crack in the door, smooth and lethally composed. "She is a willful child, Marcus. She has always required a firmer hand than you or your sister. Financial pressure is a good start, but Maya has a habit of retreating into her shell when she feels threatened. We cannot allow her to quietly ignore her obligations to this family. We need a definitive resolution." "I have thought of that," Marcus replied smoothly, the sound of him pouring another drink echoing in the quiet study. "We are not going to give her the option to retreat. We are going to back her into a corner where she cannot possibly say no." Maya edged a fraction of an inch closer to the door, her entire body rigid with intense focus. "Do not worry, Mom. I have the entire thing mapped out." Marcus boasted, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial register. "After the Christmas party on December 20th, she will have to pay. We are hosting the entire board of elders, the city councilmen, and all of Dad's major partners. The guest list is a who is who of Atlanta's elite. And your plan is to do what exactly?" Vivian asked, her tone laced with sharp curiosity. "I am going to make a toast," Marcus explained, his excitement palpable. "A grand emotional toast about family unity and the Wilson legacy." Right at the climax of the speech, with 300 of the most influential people in the state watching, "I am going to publicly thank my generous, successful sister Maya for fully funding Jordan's college tuition. I am going to ask her to stand up and take a bow for her incredible contribution to her nephew's future." The sheer audacity of the plan hung heavy in the air. Maya felt a cold, sharp shockwave ripple through her chest. "She will be trapped." Marcus chuckled, a dark, nasty sound that made Maya's skin crawl. "Think about it, Mom. She is obsessed with not looking like a failure. If she denies it, if she refuses to pay right then and there, she will look like a stingy, bitter pariah in front of every major partner and socialite in the city. She will absolutely humiliate herself and humiliate Dad's ministry. She will never dare embarrass the family like that. She will have no choice but to smile, nod, and wire the $20,000 the very next morning just to save face. Maya stood in the shadowy corridor, her heart beating with a slow, heavy rhythm. The revelation was a physical blow, stripping away any lingering illusions she held about her family. This was not just a greedy brother throwing a tantrum over an unpaid bill. This was a highly organized, premeditated execution. They had actively conspired to use her deepest insecurities against her. They weaponized the family name, her father's congregation, and the suffocating pressure of Atlanta high society to extort her. They did not view her as a daughter or a sister. They viewed her as a hostage to their public image. In the study, the silence stretched for a moment as Vivian absorbed the cruel brilliance of the plan. The matriarch of the Wilson family, the woman who preached grace and charity every Sunday morning, let out a soft, calculating hum of approval. "It is aggressive," Vivian noted, her voice entirely devoid of maternal warmth, "but it is necessary. She needs to remember who she is and where she belongs in this hierarchy. She has been allowed to pretend she is independent for far too long. A public commitment will bind her hands completely. She needs to learn respect." Marcus added, his voice hardening with spite. "She actually had the nerve to kick Chloe and me out of her apartment. She told me not to demand things that do not belong to me." Vivian sighed, a sharp sound of profound disappointment. "Then we will show her exactly what happens when she forgets her place. Prepare a lesson for her, Marcus. Make sure the toast is flawless. Make sure the spotlight is directly on her. She will learn that defying this family carries a very public, very steep price." "Understood," Marcus replied, the clinking of crystal signaling a victorious toast between mother and son. December 20th will be her reality check. Outside the door, Maya slowly lowered her hand. She did not grab her misdirected mail. She did not burst into the room to scream at them for their treacherous plotting. The anger that had initially flared inside her vanished completely, replaced by a freezing, hyper-focused clarity. She had just been handed the exact blueprint of their destruction. They wanted a public spectacle. They wanted to drag her into the center of the grand ballroom on December 20th, strip away her defenses, and force her to bend the knee to the Wilson family brand. They thought they were backing a struggling, insecure small business owner into an inescapable social corner. They were so blindly arrogant, so completely obsessed with their own reflections that they had failed to consider one crucial variable. They had absolutely no idea who they were actually inviting to their party. Maya turned away from the heavy oak door, her footsteps completely silent on the thick carpet. As she glided down the long hallway toward the grand foyer, a terrifying razor-sharp smile curved on her lips. The pieces of the chessboard had just snapped into perfect alignment. Marcus wanted to use the December 20th Christmas gala to trap her. He wanted to use his high society connections and their father's major partners as an audience for his triumph. Maya would let him set the stage. She would let him gather the city councilmen, the board of elders, and the banking executives. She would let him raise his glass and make his smug, manipulative speech. Because Maya knew something Marcus did not. She knew the names of the investors funding her father's new megachurch expansion. She knew the corporate backers underwriting Marcus's wealth management firm. And more importantly, she knew that her own holding company, Empire Logistics, had recently acquired the primary debt on both of those major ventures. By the time December 20th arrived, Maya would not just be a guest at their party. She would be the woman holding the deeds to their entire empire. She stepped out the front doors of the mansion into the crisp night air, the heavy mahogany clicking shut behind her. The cold wind hit her face, but she felt entirely untouchable. They wanted to prepare a lesson for her. They wanted to teach her about power, about leverage, and about the harsh realities of high society. Maya slid into the driver's seat of her car, starting the engine with a quiet roar. She gripped the steering wheel, her eyes fixed on the illuminated gates of her parents' estate. "I will gladly attend your party, Marcus," she whispered into the quiet cabin of her car, her voice hard and unrelenting. "But you are not going to like the gift I bring." She shifted the car into gear and drove away into the night, her mind already calculating the rapid, brutal corporate acquisitions she would authorize the very next morning. The countdown to December 20th had officially begun. The drive from the suffocating opulence of Buckhead to the sleek, towering glass facade of Empire Logistics headquarters in downtown Atlanta took exactly 22 minutes. Maya did not go home to her loft. She did not seek out a friend to vent about the betrayal she had just witnessed. Emotions were a luxury she could no longer afford. She needed data. She needed leverage. Pulling her car into the private, secured underground garage, Maya bypassed the main lobby and took the executive elevator directly to the top floor. The doors slid open to reveal the nerve center of her actual life. The C-suite of Empire Logistics was a masterpiece of modern corporate design, a sprawling expanse of brushed steel, polished concrete, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding panoramic view of the city. Below her, thousands of trucks, hundreds of warehouses, and a global supply chain moved silently through the night, all bending to her ultimate authority. Her family thought she was struggling to pay rent on a rusty fleet of delivery vans. They had no concept of the beast she had built. Maya walked into her corner office, tossing her keys onto the massive obsidian desk. She pressed a single button on her secure intercom. "Get Elias in here, now!" Less than 3 minutes later, Elias Thorne, her chief financial officer, stepped into the office. Elias was a brilliant, ruthlessly efficient man who treated numbers like weapons. He had been with Maya since the very beginning, helping her navigate the complex corporate acquisitions that had turned Empire Logistics from a regional courier into an untouchable global titan. He took one look at Maya's rigid posture and the glacial, dead-eyed calm on her face, and he immediately knew that this was not a standard late-night business meeting. "What is the target?" Elias asked, skipping the pleasantries entirely as he pulled out his encrypted tablet. "Marcus and Chloe Wilson," Maya stated, her voice as hard and cold as shattered glass. "I want a complete microscopic financial autopsy on both of them. I want to know what they earn, what they spend, and exactly who they owe. Search every single line of credit, every mortgage, every quiet personal loan, and every business account associated with his name and her boutique. I want their entire financial existence laid out on this desk before the sun comes up." Elias did not ask questions. He simply nodded, his fingers already flying across the screen of his tablet to mobilize their internal forensic accounting team. Consider it done. The process was terrifyingly fast. Empire Logistics possessed resources, data access, and financial influence that rivaled major federal institutions. While Maya stood by the window watching the city lights flicker in the darkness, Elias and his team ripped apart the carefully constructed illusion of her brother's perfect life. 2 hours later, Elias walked back into her office. He dropped a thick-bound dossier onto the center of her desk. He did not look triumphant. He looked almost disgusted by what he had found. "It is a house of cards," Maya Elias said, shaking his head as he opened the file. "A spectacular, rotting house of cards. They are completely and utterly broke." Maya turned away from the window, walking back to her desk. She leaned over the open file, her eyes scanning the highlighted numbers. "Explain it to me." Marcus plays the part of the wildly successful vice president of wealth management. Elias began, pointing to the first page. But his actual base salary does not even begin to cover his lifestyle. He has a massive multi-million-dollar mortgage on that Buckhead estate, 2 luxury car leases, and country club fees that rival a small nation's GDP. To keep up appearances, he took out a massive home equity line of credit 2 years ago. That line is completely maxed out. He is drowning in high-interest debt, and he has been quietly borrowing against his own firm's speculative client margins just to make his minimum monthly payments. Maya stared at the red numbers documenting her brother's secret desperation. The $20,000 he had demanded for Jordan's tuition. It was not just Marcus being cheap or trying to bully her. He literally did not have the liquid cash to pay for his own son's education. He was trying to extort his younger sister to cover up his own financial ruin. And Chloe Maya asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Elias flipped to the next section of the dossier. Chloe's high-end luxury boutique is a financial black hole. She spends a fortune on importing exclusive European inventory, but her actual sales numbers are abysmal. She has not paid her primary suppliers in over 90 days. To keep the doors open and maintain her image as a successful businesswoman, she took out a predatory short-term commercial loan 6 months ago. Maya traced the line showing the commercial loan origin. A cruel, triumphant smile began to spread across her face. "Who holds the paper on Chloe's commercial loan?" Maya asked, though she already suspected the answer. Elias smirked, tapping the specific holding company listed on the document. A mid-sized private equity firm based out of Chicago. A firm that as of last Tuesday was officially acquired by the venture capital wing of Empire Logistics. You own her debt, Maya. You own the boutique. You own everything inside it. If you call in the loan tomorrow, she is bankrupt by noon. Maya closed the dossier. The sheer magnitude of their hypocrisy was staggering. Marcus and Chloe were sitting in opulent country clubs and grand church banquets, sneering at Maya's supposed poverty while they were secretly suffocating under millions of dollars in toxic debt. They were planning to publicly humiliate her on December 20th to extort $20,000 to maintain their fake, pristine image. They thought they held all the power. They thought they were untouchable. Elias, Maya said, her voice ringing with absolute authority. "Do not call in Chloe's loan. Not yet. I want you to instruct our venture capital wing to quietly buy up the debt on Marcus's home equity line of credit. Pay whatever premium the original lenders demand. I want Empire Logistics to be the sole creditor for his estate." Elias raised an eyebrow, instantly understanding the brutal geometry of her plan. "You want to own his house. I want to own his entire reality." Maya corrected, her eyes burning with a relentless, calculating fire. "I want to own the boutique. I want to own the mortgage. I want to own the very ground he stands on. Marcus wants to make a grand public spectacle about family obligations at the Christmas gala on December 20th. He wants to back me into a corner in front of 300 of the most powerful people in Atlanta. I am going to let him do exactly that." She walked around his desk, her posture radiating absolute command. "Prepare the foreclosure notices for the Buckhead estate. Draft the immediate asset seizure documents for Chloe's boutique. Print every single page of this financial autopsy, including the evidence of Marcus borrowing against his firm's client margins. Put it all in a single legally binding portfolio." "When do you want the portfolio delivered?" Elias asked, his fingers flying across his tablet as he initiated the massive financial acquisitions. "I do not want it delivered," Maya said softly, turning back to the window to watch the sunrise slowly painting the Atlanta skyline in shades of gold and crimson. "I am going to hand it to him myself, right in the middle of his perfect, arrogant toast. They wanted to teach me a lesson about power. On December 20th, I am going to show them that I am the only one holding the pen." The trap was officially set. The hidden chess pieces had been moved into perfect lethal position. Marcus and Vivian thought they were hunting a wounded animal. They had absolutely no idea they had just locked themselves in a cage with a predator. Maya watched the morning light reflect off the glass towers of her city, completely ready for the bloodbath to come. The relentless hum of the Empire Logistics servers provided a steady white noise soundtrack to the most devastating morning of Maya's professional life. She had arrived at her headquarters before dawn, bypassing the executive elevator to walk straight into the secure forensic accounting department. The room was a sprawling, windowless bunker, illuminated only by the cool blue glow of dozens of oversized monitors. Here, her elite team of data analysts and financial investigators had spent the last 48 hours ripping Marcus's pristine public image to shreds. Elias Thorne was already waiting for her at the central conference table. He did not look like a man who had just orchestrated a multi-million-dollar debt acquisition. He looked profoundly disturbed. He pushed a single physical manila folder across the polished glass table toward her. "We executed the buyouts on Chloe's commercial loan and Marcus's home equity line of credit," Elias stated, his voice devoid of its usual sharp corporate edge. You are now the sole holding entity for every major piece of debt attached to their names. But when our team dug into the origin of Marcus's most recent margin calls, we found an anomaly. A massive one. Maya sat down slowly, her eyes locked on the folder. What kind of anomaly? I ordered a trace on how Marcus managed to stave off bankruptcy for the last 2 quarters, Elias explained, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the table. His lifestyle overhead is astronomical, and his legitimate income stopped covering it over a year ago. A man in his position carrying that much toxic debt should have defaulted by spring. He needed a sudden massive influx of liquid cash to keep his creditors from seizing his assets. I had the team run a deep dive sweep on his offshore shell accounts. We found the cash infusion. Elias reached over and flipped the folder open. But it was not a bank loan, Elias continued, pointing to a heavily redacted bank statement, showing a series of rapid, high-volume wire transfers. It was not a corporate bonus. It was a private trust fund. Maya frowned, scanning the highlighted routing numbers. Our parents do not use trusts for liquid cash. They tie everything up in real estate and the church's tax-exempt holdings. It did not come from your parents, Elias said softly. Look at the beneficiary name. Maya dragged her finger down the page until she hit the bolded text at the bottom of the origin document. The name leaped off the page, striking her with the force of a physical blow. Jordan Wilson. Her nephew. Maya felt the air leave her lungs. The document was a summary of an educational trust established by their late grandfather 8 years ago. It was a secure, untouchable account, designed to mature on Jordan's 18th birthday, guaranteeing his college tuition would be fully funded regardless of the family's future financial circumstances. The principal amount deposited into the account had been exactly $150,000. Look at the current balance, Elias instructed, his voice thick with disgust. Maya's eyes moved to the top right corner of the page. The balance was 0. 8 months ago, Elias explained, mapping out the timeline with a laser pointer on the document. Marcus's highly leveraged tech stock portfolio took a catastrophic dive. He was facing an immediate aggressive margin call. If he did not produce $150,000 in cash within 48 hours, his firm would have liquidated his assets, and his career would have been over. So he used his authority as vice president of wealth management to bypass the standard withdrawal flags. He forged an emergency distribution mandate, liquidated his own son's college fund, and funneled every single penny into his failing margin accounts. Maya sat frozen in her chair. The room around her seemed to drop in temperature. He stole it, she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. He stole his own son's future to cover his bad bets. He drained it dry, Elias confirmed. And then he lost it all anyway. The market rebounded, but his positions had already been wiped out. The money is entirely gone, Maya. A sickening, horrifying clarity washed over Maya. Suddenly, the manic, aggressive ambush at her apartment made perfect, terrifying sense. The $20,000 Marcus had demanded for Jordan's private preparatory academy tuition had never been about him simply being overextended. It had been an act of sheer, desperate survival. The first major tuition bill of the year had arrived, and Chloe would have naturally expected Marcus to draw from the grandfather's trust fund to pay it. If Marcus could not produce the money, Chloe would start asking questions. She would demand to see the account statements. She would discover that her perfect, successful husband was actually a thief who had robbed their child blind. Marcus did not just need $20,000 to pay a bill. He needed Maya to be his unwitting accomplice in a massive financial cover-up. If she had written that check, Marcus would have gone home to Chloe, claimed the trust fund was temporarily tied up in a high-yield long-term bond, and used Maya's money to plug the hole. He was actively trying to extort his younger sister to hide a felony from his own wife. He is a monster, Maya said, her voice dropping into a hollow, dangerous register. He is a cornered animal, Elias corrected. And cornered animals will do anything to survive. That is why he is plotting to humiliate you at the Christmas gala. He is out of options, Maya. His creditors are circling, his wife is expecting a tuition payment, and the trust fund he was supposed to manage is empty. He needs your money to keep his world from imploding. He thinks he can use the pressure of 300 high society guests to force your hand. Maya stared at the zeros on the bank statement. The sheer, unadulterated evil of it was staggering. This was the man who stood beside their father, at the pulpit, smiling for the congregation, wearing tailored suits, and quoting scripture about responsibility and family values. This was the man who had marched into her home, insulted her intelligence, and threatened to destroy her entire livelihood because she refused to fund his illusion. He had looked her right in the eyes and called her selfish while he was secretly carrying the guilt of bankrupting his own flesh and blood. He actually thought he could win. He actually believed that by backing her into a corner at a fancy holiday party, he could terrorize her into saving him from his own crimes. Are the transfer signatures authenticated? Maya asked, her tone shifting from shock to absolute lethal precision. Elias nodded. We have the digital footprints, the IP addresses, and the forged authorization forms. It is airtight. It is a clear-cut case of fiduciary fraud and embezzlement. If this goes to a prosecutor, Marcus is looking at a minimum of 5 years in a federal penitentiary. Maya stood up from the table. The anger that had been simmering inside her for years finally crystallized into something cold, hard, and utterly unstoppable. She was no longer just dealing with a toxic, narcissistic brother. She was dealing with a criminal who had victimized an innocent child to protect his ego. Bundle it, Maya commanded, her eyes locked onto Elias. I want the trust fund documents, the forged signatures, and the zero balance statements bound together in a single presentation-grade portfolio. Elias gathered the papers, his expression deadly serious. Do we forward this to the district attorney? Not yet, Maya replied, a dark, terrifying calm settling over her features. Marcus wants a public spectacle. He wants to stand up in front of the board of elders, the city council, and his wealthy peers to teach me a lesson about family obligations. He wants the spotlight. Maya walked toward the heavy glass doors of the secure data room, her silhouette sharp and commanding against the glow of the monitors. I am going to give him exactly what he wants, she said, her voice ringing with absolute finality. I am going to let him raise his glass. I am going to let him make his grand emotional toast. And right when he asks me to stand up and take a bow, I am going to drop this portfolio directly onto his dinner plate. I am going to let 300 of his closest friends watch the vice president of wealth management realize that his sister owns his house, his sister owns his wife's boutique, and his sister has the undeniable proof that he stole $150,000 from a child. Elias offered a slow, grim nod of understanding. It will be a massacre. It will be justice, Maya corrected, stepping out into the hallway. Prepare the documents, Elias. The Wilson family is about to experience a very unforgettable Christmas. Maya had her hand on the heavy glass door of the secure data room when Elias cleared his throat. The sharp, abrupt sound echoed loudly in the quiet, climate-controlled space. Wait, Elias said, his voice entirely devoid of its usual clinical detachment. The autopsy is not finished. You need to come back and look at this. The margin call Marcus was facing was real, but it was only half the story. Maya stopped. She turned slowly, her heels clicking against the polished concrete floor, as she walked back to the massive central conference table. Elias had pulled up a secondary forensic trail on the main overhead monitor. The screen was a chaotic web of routing numbers, offshore accounts, and wire transfer logs, all glowing in harsh white against a dark background. What did you find? Maya demanded, planting her hands flat on the glass table and leaning in. I was tracing the exact path of the $150,000 after Marcus liquidated Jordan's trust fund. Elias explained, his fingers flying across his keyboard to isolate a specific financial cluster. Marcus initiated the transfer. He authorized the withdrawal, but the money did not go to his brokerage firm to cover his bad trades, at least not directly. Elias highlighted a massive block of text on the screen. The funds hit Marcus's primary checking account at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. Elias continued, his tone turning deadly serious. By 9:15 a.m., exactly 15 minutes later, the entire sum was sliced into 4 rapid consecutive wire transfers. Marcus did not make those transfers. The IP address originates from a different device authorized by a secondary user on the joint account. Maya stared at the screen, her eyes narrowing as she read the name of the secondary user, Chloe. She took it, Elias confirmed, tapping the screen. Your sister-in-law intercepted the entire $150,000 before Marcus could even route it to his creditors. She funneled every single penny into a Shell LLC registered in Delaware. Maya felt a cold, sharp shockwave ripple through her chest. Where did the Shell LLC send the money? Elias pulled up the final destination. The routing matched a commercial address in the heart of Atlanta's most expensive retail district. It was the exact address of Chloe's luxury fashion boutique. She dumped Jordan's college fund into her failing store, Maya whispered, the sheer, unadulterated evil of the act making her physically nauseous. She stole from her own stepson to keep her vanity project afloat. It gets worse, Elias said, his expression hardening as he opened a new digital dossier. I told you earlier that her boutique was a financial black hole. She owes her European suppliers a fortune. But when I ran a deep audit on the boutique's outgoing expenses for the past 8 months, I found out why she is constantly bleeding cash. She is not just a terrible businesswoman, Maya. She is a degenerate gambler. Maya froze. Chloe? Elias nodded, bringing up a horrifying list of financial transactions masked as corporate expenses. Chloe has been using the boutique as a front to launder money to pay off massive high-stakes gambling debts. We are talking about VIP casino markers in Las Vegas and Macau, plus hundreds of thousands of dollars wired to offshore unregulated online betting syndicates. She plays high-limit baccarat. She loses constantly. When her creditors started threatening to seize her personal assets 8 months ago, she panicked. She saw the massive influx of liquid cash hit the joint account from Jordan's trust fund, and she took it to save her own skin. Maya stood in the center of the dark room, the glow of the monitors casting sharp predatory shadows across her face. The hypocrisy was so profound, so utterly vile, that it defied basic human logic. Less than 48 hours ago, Chloe had stood in Maya's living room, clutching her designer handbag, looking down her perfectly sculpted nose at Maya's life. She had sneered at Maya's independence. She had threatened to use her high society connections to bankrupt Maya's business. She paraded around Atlanta, playing the role of the pristine, morally superior white savior who had married into a prominent black religious dynasty. She attended charity galas, smiled for the church congregation, and projected an illusion of flawless, untouchable wealth. And beneath that glittering, perfect surface, she was a desperate, lying parasite. She had literally stolen a child's future to pay off her bookies and fund her shopping sprees. Did Marcus know? Maya asked, her voice dropping into a lethal, quiet register. Did he know she took the money before he could use it? Elias pulled up a series of internal bank messages. He knew the money was gone, but Chloe lied to him about where it went. She fabricated a story about a sudden catastrophic inventory holdup at customs that required an immediate massive cash bond. She convinced him that if she did not pay the bond, the boutique would be seized by federal authorities and the family name would be ruined. Marcus was already panicking about his own margin calls. He bought her lie because he was too desperate to look closely at the books. He is a fool, Maya said, her eyes locked on the undeniable proof of Chloe's crimes. He liquidated his own son's trust to save his career, and his wife robbed him blind to pay for her gambling addiction. And now, because the money is completely gone, Marcus is trying to extort $20,000 from me to pay Jordan's tuition before Chloe realizes the trust is empty. It is a vicious circle of fraud, Elias agreed, closing the digital files. Marcus is lying to Chloe about being broke. Chloe is lying to Marcus about stealing the trust fund. And both of them are conspiring to terrorize you into paying their bills so their perfect little world does not collapse. Maya turned away from the monitors. The anger that had been simmering inside her vanished entirely, replaced by a sense of absolute terrifying power. She had them. She had them both by the throat, and they did not even realize they were choking. They wanted to use the December 20th Christmas gala to publicly humiliate her. Marcus planned to stand up in front of the board of elders, the city council, and their father's wealthy investors to force Maya to submit. He wanted to trap her in front of Atlanta's elite. Elias, Maya commanded, her voice ringing with brutal corporate efficiency. I want a separate portfolio built exclusively for Chloe. Print out every single casino marker. Print out the wire transfers to the online betting syndicates. Print out the exact timestamp showing her moving Jordan's college money into her Shell LLC. I want it all bound in a pristine white leather folder. Elias nodded his fingers, moving rapidly over his keyboard. And Marcus? Marcus gets his own folder. Maya replied, a cold, merciless smile spreading across her face. He gets the foreclosure notice on the Buckhead estate. He gets the proof that Empire Logistics owns his home equity line of credit. And he gets the documentation showing he illegally authorized the liquidation of a miner's trust fund. Maya walked toward the exit, her mind calculating the exact trajectory of the coming slaughter. They are going to host the party of the decade, she said, pausing at the heavy glass doors. They are going to serve expensive champagne and sing hymns about family unity. And right when Marcus raises his glass to deliver his little extortion speech, I am going to hand them their respective folders. I am going to let Marcus realize his wife is a gambling addict who stole from his son. I am going to let Chloe realize her husband is completely bankrupt. And I am going to let the entire Fellowship Cathedral watch their golden couple tear each other to shreds. She pushed the door open, stepping out into the quiet executive hallway. Have everything ready by the 19th, Elias. We are going to burn their fake empire to the ground. 36 hours later, Maya found herself sitting in the sun-drenched courtyard of l'Orangerie, the most exclusive and notoriously pretentious European-style tea room in the heart of Buckhead. She rarely frequented this part of the city, unless she was finalizing a real estate acquisition. But today, she wanted to observe the ecosystem her brother and sister-in-law clung to with such desperate, pathetic ferocity. The air smelled of imported roasted espresso, expensive floral perfumes, and old money. Valets in crisp uniforms rushed to park a parade of foreign luxury cars, while the patrons draped in designer labels picked at organic pastries and traded high society gossip. Maya sat alone at a corner table, dressed in a simple tailored black trench coat over a pristine white silk blouse. She was reviewing a digital summary of the final foreclosure documents on her encrypted tablet when a shrill, artificially sweet voice sliced through the ambient hum of the courtyard. Well, look who it is. I am absolutely shocked they let you pass the maitre d'. Maya locked her tablet and looked up slowly. Chloe was standing less than 3 feet away, flanked by 3 women who looked like exact carbon copies of herself. They all wore variations of pastel tweed suits, oversized sunglasses, and the kind of forced identical smiles that required a dedicated plastic surgeon. Chloe stood at the center of the formation, practically vibrating with a toxic, predatory energy. She was wearing a stunning Chanel jacket, a piece Maya recognized immediately because Elias had shown her the boutique's inventory ledger just yesterday. Chloe had not sold that jacket. She had written it off as damaged stock and kept it for herself. Maya, darling? Chloe projected her voice loud enough to turn the heads of the patrons at the adjacent tables. What on earth brings you to Buckhead? Are you delivering a package for one of our neighbors? The 3 women behind Chloe let out a synchronized, breathy chorus of giggles. They looked at Maya with unapologetic disdain, their eyes raking over her unbranded clothing and bare wrists calculating her net worth and finding it laughably deficient. I am just enjoying a quiet cup of Earl Grey, Chloe. Maya replied, her voice smooth, level, and entirely devoid of intimidation. Chloe did not wait for an invitation. She pulled out the wrought iron chair opposite Maya and sat down, crossing her legs elegantly. Her friends remained standing behind her, forming a wall of hostile manufactured glamour. Chloe leaned forward, resting her elbows on the marble table, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the afternoon sunlight. Girls, this is Marcus's little sister, Maya, Chloe announced, gesturing dismissively with a manicured hand. The one I was telling you about. The courier. Logistics, Maya corrected, gently picking up her teacup. Right, logistics. Chloe sighed, rolling her eyes as if the distinction was entirely irrelevant. Beatrice Sloane Penelope. You remember me telling you how Marcus is always trying to help his family pull themselves up by their bootstraps. It is a constant charity project. The woman named Beatrice offered a tight, sympathetic smile. It is so noble of Marcus. Family can be such a heavy burden when they refuse to match your standard of living. Maya took a slow, deliberate sip of her tea. The porcelain felt warm against her fingertips. She looked directly into Chloe's eyes. Behind the heavy mascara and the perfectly applied contour, Maya could see the faint, frantic exhaustion of a woman who was drowning. Chloe's pupils were slightly dilated, her posture rigid, her energy manic. She looked exactly like a high-stakes gambler, waiting for a roulette wheel to stop spinning. "Are you ready for the Christmas gala next week, Maya?" Chloe asked, her tone dripping with mock concern. "I was actually going to call you later today. The Board of Elders and the City Council are all attending. It is a strict black tie event. I know your wardrobe leans heavily toward polyester blends and sensible flats, so if you need to borrow something from the clearance rack at my boutique, I would be happy to authorize an employee discount. We cannot have you embarrassing Marcus in front of the mayor." "That is very generous of you, Chloe," Maya said softly. "But my wardrobe is fully prepared for the 20th. Chloe let out a sharp, patronizing laugh. "I certainly hope so. Marcus is planning a very special moment for the family. He wants to make a grand gesture regarding Jordan's private academy tuition. We really feel that allowing you to contribute the $20,000 is a beautiful way to teach you financial responsibility. Marcus believes that once you learn how to handle real money, you might finally find the motivation to go back to school." The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. Chloe was weaponizing the very tuition bills she had secretly bankrupted her stepson to avoid paying. She was using the stolen money as a bludgeon to humiliate Maya in public. "It is such a tragedy that you never finished your degree," Chloe continued, pitching her voice louder to ensure the neighboring tables could hear every word of the humiliation. "The blue-collar life is fine for some, I suppose, but in our world education and pedigree are everything. Marcus worries constantly that you are going to hit a ceiling driving those delivery vans. But I always tell him you cannot force sophistication on someone who is perfectly content being mediocre." The three sycophants nodded in solemn agreement. "It takes a very specific type of intellect to manage high-level finance and luxury retail," Beatrice chimed in, looking down her nose at Maya. "You should listen to your sister-in-law, Maya. She runs one of the most successful boutiques in the district. She understands high-stakes business." Maya lowered her teacup to the saucer. The ceramic clinked softly against the marble table. She looked at Beatrice, then at Sloane, and finally brought her gaze back to Chloe. Maya thought about the zero balance statement on Jordan's trust fund. She thought about the offshore betting syndicates. She thought about the mountain of toxic debt currently sitting in a secure server at Empire Logistics, entirely under her control. She possessed the undeniable legally binding power to strip the clothes off Chloe's back, to seize the boutique she was currently bragging about, and to send both her and Marcus to a federal penitentiary for wire fraud and embezzlement. Chloe was sitting on the throne made of gasoline, striking matches to look important, completely unaware that Maya held the only fire extinguisher. Maya did not defend her education. She did not correct their assumptions about her business. She did not raise her voice or display a single ounce of anger. Instead, a slow, freezing smile spread across her face. It was a smile of absolute, terrifying, predatory control. "You are entirely correct, Chloe," Maya said, her voice dropping to a register so quiet and intense that Chloe actually leaned in to hear her. "High-stakes business requires a very specific type of intellect. It requires you to know exactly when to fold a bad hand." Chloe blinked, a micro-expression of confusion and sudden, inexplicable panic flashing across her heavily powdered face. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means I admire your dedication to the illusion," Maya continued, her dark eyes locking onto Chloe with the crushing weight of an ocean trench. "The Wilson Standard is a fascinating concept. The lengths people will go to in order to maintain a facade of wealth. The desperate, reckless gambles they will take behind closed doors just to keep the lights on. It must be exhausting to constantly play with money that does not actually belong to you." Chloe stiffened. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her foundation looking stark and artificial. Her manicured fingers twitched against the table. She opened her mouth to speak, but her throat seemed to have gone completely dry. The word gamble hung in the air between them, sharp and lethal as a straight razor. Maya did not give her a chance to recover. She stood up gracefully, smoothing the front of her trench coat. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a single crisp $100 bill, placing it precisely in the center of the table to cover her tea. Enjoy your afternoon, ladies, Maya said, offering the three silent friends a polite, dismissive nod. And Chloe, please do not worry about my attire for the gala. I promise you when I stand up on December 20th, I will be bringing something to the table that no one in your circle has ever seen before. It is going to be a highly educational evening for everyone involved. Maya did not wait for a response. She turned on her heel and walked away, her posture radiating untouchable billionaire authority. She left Chloe sitting frozen at the marble table surrounded by her high society friends, suddenly shivering in the warm Atlanta sun as a cold, creeping sense of absolute dread began to wrap around her throat. The drive back to this Empire Logistics Tower was a masterclass in compartmentalization. Maya watched the manicured lawns of Buckhead fade into the towering steel and glass of the financial district. She picked up her encrypted phone and dialed her chief financial officer. Elias answered on the first ring. Initiate the Apex Holding Protocol. Maya commanded, her voice perfectly level. Buy it all. Apex Holding was the private equity ghost ship she had created years ago. A shadow entity nested so deeply within her corporate structure that not even the most aggressive financial journalists had managed to connect it to Empire Logistics. It was her designated weapon for hostile takeovers, a financial black hole designed to swallow toxic assets and crush over-leveraged competitors. Today, it was going to swallow her own family. I want every single piece of paper attached to Chloe's name, Maya continued as her car glided into the secure underground garage. I want the commercial lease for the boutique. I want the inventory liens. I want the predatory short-term loans she used to cover those offshore casino markers. Calculate the total exposure. I am looking at the ledger right now, Elias replied, the rapid clacking of his keyboard filtering through the speaker. Her total operational and unsecured debt is sitting at exactly $1.2 million. The original lenders are getting nervous. She has missed 3 consecutive minimum payments. They are preparing to initiate asset seizure protocols by the end of the month. They are not seizing anything, Maya stated, stepping out of her car and walking directly toward the secure executive elevators. We are buying the debt outright. Pay them a 10% premium to expedite the transfer of the paper today. I want Apex Holding registered as the sole primary creditor for that $1.2 million before the markets close. Elias did not hesitate. Executing the wire transfers now. The original creditors will be thrilled to offload this garbage. But Maya, once Apex Holding acquires this debt, you are legally obligated to issue a formal notice of default if you intend to collect. The grace period has already expired. I am well aware of the grace period, Maya said as the elevator doors slid open to her top-floor office. Draft the notice of default. Draft the immediate asset seizure warrants for the boutique's entire inventory. Draft the eviction notice for the commercial space. She walked across the expanse of her office and stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows looking down at the sprawling city of Atlanta. The afternoon sun was casting long, sharp shadows across the concrete below. Have the legal department finalize everything Maya ordered, but put a hard lock on the delivery system. No certified mail, no process servers. Not a single piece of this paperwork leaves our secure server until I personally authorize it. By nightfall, the massive financial snare had been pulled completely taut. Maya sat at the head of the obsidian conference table in the secure data room, reviewing the physical documents Elias had meticulously assembled. The reality of the paperwork was staggering. It was a complete, inescapable financial guillotine. On her left sat a thick black leather portfolio. Inside was the undeniable proof of Marcus's ultimate failure. It contained the deed of trust for his sprawling Buckhead estate, now legally owned by Apex Holding through the buyout of his defaulted home equity line of credit. Behind that deed sat the agonizingly detailed digital footprint of his felony. The forged signature on Jordan's trust fund, the unauthorized withdrawal of $150,000, and the desperate failed wire transfers to his burning margin accounts. On her right sat a pristine white leather portfolio. This was Chloe's financial autopsy. $1.2 million in toxic debt broken down line by line. The documents proved that Chloe had intercepted the stolen trust fund money, laundering it through her boutique to pay off unregulated gambling syndicates. It contained the asset seizure warrants that would leave her high-end store completely empty, locking the doors and destroying her fabricated socialite status overnight. Maya reached out and let her fingertips trace the smooth leather of the two portfolios. She was no longer just the little sister they could belittle and dismiss. She was the executioner. She owned the roof over their heads. She owned the clothes in their closets. She held the definitive proof of their federal crimes. They were breathing on her borrowed time. "Everything is locked and loaded," Elias said quietly, standing near the door of the data room. "Apex Holding is now the supreme creditor for the Wilson estate. If you drop these folders on the table, their credit scores evaporate instantly. Their assets revert to us. And if a single prosecutor sees the trust fund documentation, Marcus and Chloe are facing guaranteed prison sentences." "They thought they could play God with my life," Maya murmured, her eyes dark and unreadable as she stared at the files. "They thought they could bleed a child dry, hide their filth behind designer clothes, and use me as a human shield. They wanted to humiliate me. They wanted a public spectacle." She closed the portfolios, aligning them perfectly in the center of the glass table. December 20th. Maya said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried the lethal weight of a loaded weapon. "The Christmas gala. 300 guests. The mayor, the church elders, their wealthy investors. They are all going to be sitting in that ballroom watching Marcus play the perfect patriarch." She stood up, her posture radiating an absolute terrifying calm. "Lock these in the vault, Elias. Bring them to me on the night of the 20th. I am going to let my brother raise his glass. I am going to let him make his arrogant, extortionist speech about family values. And then I am going to take everything from them." The board was set. The chess pieces had been moved into a flawless, inescapable checkmate. Marcus and Chloe were spending their days preparing for a grand, opulent holiday celebration, entirely oblivious to the fact that they were already dead in the water. They had awakened a sleeping dragon, and on December 20th, they were going to burn. The Piedmont Country Club was a fortress of old money and generational privilege, standing entirely isolated from the reality of the city below. On the night of December 20th, a light frost clung to the manicured lawns, reflecting the warm golden glow of thousands of fairy lights strung through the ancient oak trees. The circular driveway was a slow-moving river of Bentleys, Porsches, and custom-ordered armored SUVs. Valets in pristine white uniforms sprinted through the freezing air, opening doors for the absolute apex of Atlanta high society. Maya's matte black Maybach glided to a silent stop at the base of the grand marble staircase. The valet rushed forward, pulling the heavy door open. When Maya stepped out into the freezing night air, she did not look like the struggling blue-collar sister Marcus had spent years describing to his congregation. She did not look like a woman who needed a handout or a lesson in financial literacy. She looked like the CEO of a global empire. She wore a custom-tailored, razor-sharp obsidian tuxedo suit that draped perfectly over her frame. The fabric absorbed the light, rather than reflecting it, giving her an aura of dark, untouchable authority. Her hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant knot, and her only jewelry was a single flawless diamond pendant resting against her collarbone. There were no flashy designer logos. There was only the quiet, terrifying hum of absolute limitless wealth. She handed her keys to the valet without a word and began her ascent up the marble steps. The heavy mahogany doors swung open, revealing the grand foyer. The air inside was thick with the scent of expensive pine garlands, roasted winter spices, and the heavy, musky perfumes of the city's elite. A string quartet played a classical arrangement in the corner, their notes floating above the low, steady roar of wealthy people, congratulating themselves on their own success. Maya walked past the coat check and stepped into the main ballroom. Her posture was flawless. Her chin was held high. Her dark eyes swept across the room with the cool, detached calculation of a predator surveying a feeding ground. Every detail of the space was designed to intimidate. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting fractured rainbows across the polished marble floor. Waiters in black tie livery glided through the crowd with silver trays of champagne and caviar. The room was packed with 300 of the most powerful people in the state. State senators, real estate tycoons, venture capitalists, and the entire board of elders from the Fellowship Cathedral were all gathered here rubbing shoulders and trading favors. As Maya moved deeper into the room, a strange, undeniable ripple effect began to take place. People who had never met her, people who had only ever heard Marcus's fabricated tales of her supposed poverty, stopped talking. Conversations trailed off as she walked past. Heads turned. Glasses were lowered. The elite of Atlanta were fundamentally wired to recognize power, and the woman gliding through their ranks radiated a level of authority that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand up. They instinctively parted for her, clearing a path through the dense crowd as if repelled by a magnetic force. Maya did not acknowledge the stares. She did not smile at the curious politicians or the whispering socialites. She kept her gaze fixed straight ahead, navigating the opulent labyrinth of the ballroom with terrifying precision. She spotted them near the massive roaring stone fireplace at the far end of the room. Marcus and Chloe were holding court, completely surrounded by a tight circle of influential investors and church leaders. They looked like the undisputed king and queen of the gala. Marcus wore a bespoke velvet dinner jacket, his teeth gleaming as he laughed at a joke told by the mayor. Chloe stood pressed against his side, practically dripping in diamonds. She wore a sweeping metallic silver gown that caught every flash of light, her hair styled in elaborate cascading waves. She held a crystal flute of champagne, tilting her head back, in practiced musical laughter. They were the picture of pristine, unshakable success. They were the ultimate illusion. Maya took a slow, deep breath, letting the steady, rhythmic bass of the string quartet ground her. In the secure pocket of her blazer, she felt the solid, rectangular weight of the encrypted hard drive containing the digital copies of their financial autopsies. Elias was standing by in a secure vehicle parked less than a block away, holding the physical leather portfolios, waiting for her single text message to breach the building. Maya stepped out of the shadow of a massive floral arrangement and walked directly into the light, moving straight toward her brother's circle. Chloe saw her first. Maya watched the exact sequence of emotions play out across her sister-in-law's heavily contoured face. First, there was a flash of mild annoyance at the sight of an approaching guest. Then, as Chloe's eyes focused on Maya's face, there was a sudden jarring shock of recognition. Finally, as Chloe took in the razor-sharp cut of Maya's obsidian suit, the flawless diamond at her throat, and the glacial, commanding way she moved through the crowd, a deep, primal confusion settled into her eyes. This was not the woman she had mocked at the tea room. This was not the target she had planned to humiliate. Chloe tugged urgently on Marcus's velvet sleeve, her manicured nails digging into the fabric. Marcus turned his head, his brilliant, charismatic smile still firmly in place. When he saw Maya standing at the edge of his circle, the smile froze. It did not disappear, but it became suddenly rigid, locking onto his face like a plastic mask. He quickly scanned her outfit, his eyes darting to the diamond pendant, his brain frantically trying to reconcile the sister he thought he knew with the billionaire standing in front of him. Maya, Marcus said, his voice booming out over the crowd, dripping with a sudden, forced joviality that sounded hollow to anyone paying close attention. "You made it. We were beginning to worry you might have gotten lost on the way up here." The circle of investors and elders turned to look at her. The mayor offered a polite, confused nod. The air around the fireplace suddenly felt dangerously electric. "I know exactly where I am," Marcus Maya replied. Her voice was not loud, but it carried a razor-sharp acoustic clarity that sliced right through the ambient noise of the ballroom. "I would not miss this night for anything in the world." Chloe forced a tight, panicked smile, stepping slightly behind her husband. "You look very striking, Maya. I did not realize you owned a suit like that. It is very modern." "It gets the job done," Maya said softly, her dark eyes locking onto Chloe's. "It is amazing what you can afford when you do not waste your capital on bad bets." Chloe flinched. The champagne in her crystal flute sloshed dangerously close to the rim. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Marcus, completely oblivious to the lethal subtext of the exchange, clapped his hands together, stepping forward to play the benevolent patriarch. Well, we are just thrilled you decided to join our world for the evening. In fact, your timing is absolutely perfect. He turned back to the crowd, raising his glass high into the air, signaling for quiet. The nearby guests immediately stopped talking, turning their attention to the handsome vice president of wealth management. Ladies and gentlemen, friends and family, Marcus announced, his voice echoing across the marble floors. If I could have your attention for just a moment. As we gather here to celebrate the season of giving, I want to take a moment to talk about the true meaning of family. Maya stood perfectly still, her hands resting easily at her sides. She watched her brother puff out his chest, preparing to spring the trap he thought he had so cleverly designed. She watched him dig his own grave in front of 300 witnesses. She did not interrupt. She simply smiled, waiting for the execution to begin. The room fell into a reverent hush as Marcus commanded the floor. The string quartet smoothly transitioned into a soft, barely perceptible hum of background notes. Waiters paused in their tracks, trays of champagne held perfectly still. The mayor of Atlanta, a man who had built his career on associating with wealth, turned his full attention to the podium. Marcus stood tall, soaking in the collective admiration of the city's most powerful figures. He adjusted the lapels of his velvet jacket, projecting the ultimate image of the benevolent, successful patriarch. We all know that the Wilson name is synonymous with excellence. Marcus began, his voice rich and melodic, trained by years of speaking in front of massive congregations and corporate boardrooms. My father built a legacy of hard work and faith, and I have spent my entire life striving to uphold that standard. But true success is not measured by the balance in your portfolio. It is measured by how you uplift those around you. It is measured by family. A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Chloe stood to his right, smiling brightly, playing the role of the devoted, supportive wife to perfection. Marcus let the silence stretch for a theatrical beat before his gaze shifted directly to Maya. The spotlight of his attention physically drew the eyes of 300 guests toward her. Many of you know my younger sister, Maya. Marcus continued, his tone shifting into a patronizing, mournful register. Maya has always chosen a different path. While we pursued higher education and corporate leadership, Maya chose to work with her hands. She runs a small delivery business. It is honest, grueling work. And while Chloe and I have always offered to support her, Maya has fiercely guarded her independence, sometimes to a fault. A few polite, sympathetic chuckles echoed from the church elders. Maya felt the judgmental, pitying stares of the elite washing over her. They looked at her tailored suit and assumed she had rented it or drained her meager savings just to fit in for one night. They saw a charity case. But this season is about miracles, Marcus declared, his voice rising in crescendo. It is about bridging the gaps that divide us. As many of you know, my son Jordan has been accepted into Duke University. It is a proud moment for our family. And tonight, I am overjoyed to announce that Maya has finally decided to let us guide her toward financial responsibility. Chloe's smile tightened, her eyes darting nervously toward Maya. She knew Marcus was playing a dangerous game, but she desperately needed the $20,000 to keep her own lies from unraveling. In a beautiful gesture of family unity, Marcus said, projecting his voice to the back of the ballroom, Maya has pledged to sponsor Jordan's entire first-year tuition. She is contributing $20,000 to his education fund. This is an enormous sacrifice for someone in her position, and it proves that no matter where you start in life, you can always rise to the occasion. The ballroom erupted. Hundreds of wealthy guests broke into thunderous applause. Cameras flashed blinding white light bouncing off the crystal chandeliers. The mayor raised his glass in a toast. The church elders nodded with profound, sanctimonious approval. It was a perfectly executed, flawlessly designed psychological trap. Marcus had cornered her in front of the entire upper echelon of Atlanta society. If Maya denied the pledge, she would instantly become the bitter, resentful, and utterly heartless sister who refused to help her brilliant nephew. She would be publicly shamed, cast out as the greedy villain who ruined a beautiful family moment. If she accepted it, Marcus would extort the $20,000 he desperately needed to cover the money Chloe had already stolen, and he would take all the credit for teaching his poor sister how to be a responsible adult. Marcus looked down at Maya from the podium. His smile was dazzling, but his eyes were cold and triumphant. He thought he had her. He thought he had forced her into total submission. Maya did not blush. She did not look down at her shoes. She did not tremble under the weight of 300 staring eyes. Slowly, deliberately, Maya unbuttoned the single button of her obsidian jacket. She stepped out of the shadows and began to walk toward the stage. The tracking gaze of the entire room followed her. As she moved, the narrative Marcus had just spun began to violently clash with the reality of her physical presence. Maya did not walk like a struggling courier. She moved with the fluid, terrifying grace of an apex predator. Her heels clicked rhythmically against the marble floor, cutting through the dying applause. The guests closest to her instinctively stepped back, clearing a wide path. They could feel the sudden dropping temperature of the room. They could feel the raw, unadulterated power radiating from her. Chloe's breath hitched. She clutched her champagne flute so tightly her knuckles turned white. The smile vanished entirely from her face, replaced by a look of sheer, unmasked panic. She recognized the look in Maya's eyes from the courtyard in Buckhead. It was the look of a woman holding a match over a powder keg. Marcus's triumphant grin began to falter as Maya ascended the short flight of stairs to the stage. He had expected her to wave shyly from the floor, perhaps offer a meek nod of agreement while she suffocated in embarrassment. He had not expected her to invade his platform. Maya, Marcus said, his voice dropping into a tense, warning whisper as she stepped up beside him. Just smile and wave. Do not make a scene. Maya ignored him completely. She did not even look at him. She stepped up to the acrylic podium, resting her hands lightly on the edges. She leaned into the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," Maya said. Her voice echoed through the massive ballroom. It was smooth, rich, and possessed an absolute chilling authority. The remaining chatter in the room instantly died. The silence became absolute. "Marcus is right about one thing." Maya continued, her dark eyes scanning the crowd, holding the gaze of the mayor, the elders, and the silent, wealthy investors. "The Wilson name is built on a very specific standard, and tonight is absolutely about family values. It is about transparency, legacy, and the lengths we go to in order to secure our future." Marcus shifted nervously on his feet. He tried to step closer to the microphone, attempting to place a paternal hand on Maya's shoulder to reclaim control of the narrative. "That is beautiful," Maya, Marcus interrupted, his voice strained. "We are so proud of you for making this contribution. Let us give her one more round of applause." Maya smoothly sidestepped his hand without breaking eye contact with the crowd. She reached into the interior pocket of her tailored suit jacket. "I did not come here tonight just to make a pledge," Maya said, her voice slicing through Marcus's weak attempt to cut her off. "I came here to deliver the final paperwork. I believe that when you commit to a family investment, you should bring the receipts. Because as my brother just noted, true success is not measured by the illusions we project. It is measured by the brutal reality of our ledgers." She pulled a sleek black encrypted hard drive from her pocket and placed it on the podium with a sharp echoing clack. Chloe let out a tiny, involuntary gasp. Her hand flew to her throat, her diamond tennis bracelet glittering under the stage lights. She stared at the small black device as if it were a live grenade. "I was told $20,000 would secure Jordan's place at Duke." Maya said, her tone conversational but laced with a lethal underlying frost. "But when I initiated the transfer through my corporate holding company, my financial officers discovered a slight discrepancy in the Wilson family accounts. A discrepancy that I felt needed to be addressed immediately right here in front of the people who trust my brother with their wealth." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. His heart slammed against his ribs. Holding company, financial officers. The words did not make sense. They did not fit the profile of the sister he had mocked his entire adult life. "Maya, what are you doing?" Marcus hissed, his voice desperate and low. "Get off the stage." Maya turned her head slowly, looking at Marcus for the first time since she took the microphone. Her expression was a mask of beautiful, terrifying apathy. "I am bridging the gap," Marcus, Maya replied, leaning directly into the microphone so the entire ballroom could hear her response. "Just like you asked." Marcus gripped the edges of the acrylic podium, leaning forward with the easy, practiced grace of a megachurch pastor working his congregation. He let the applause wash over him, bathing in the adoration of Atlanta's most powerful citizens. He waited just long enough for the room to hang on his next breath. Tonight, Marcus continued, his voice vibrating with manufactured saccharine emotion. I want to send a very special, very public thank you to my younger sister Maya. He extended a hand toward where she stood in the shadows at the base of the stage. She has pledged to cover the entire $20,000 cost of my son Jordan's first year at Duke University, Marcus announced, projecting his voice to the furthest corners of the ballroom. Let us hear it for the most amazing aunt in the world. The ballroom erupted. The shift in the room was violent and immediate. Hundreds of heads swiveled in unison. The lenses of society photographers snapped toward Maya, blinding her with a rapid-fire barrage of bright white flashes. The invisible pressure in the space dropped over her shoulders like a heavy, suffocating net of lead. It was a crushing, highly coordinated psychological assault. Marcus had engineered a scenario where refusal was socially impossible. If she said no, she would instantly become the villain of the evening, the heartless, stingy sister who publicly rejected her brilliant nephew in front of the mayor, the city council, and the church elders. If she said yes, she surrendered to his extortion. Down at the primary VIP table, sitting dead center in the splash zone of the chandelier's brightest light, Vivian Wilson raised her glass of vintage champagne. Maya's mother was draped in heavy pearls and emeralds, her face pulled into a tight, aristocratic mask of toxic pride. Vivian caught Chloe's eye across the room. The matriarch and the daughter-in-law shared a brilliant, synchronized smile of absolute triumphant malice. They had won. They were watching the black sheep of the family being publicly corralled, branded, and sheared for their entertainment. Maya felt the weight of 300 elite pairs of eyes dissecting her. They looked at her tailored suit and assumed she was a struggling blue-collar worker trying desperately to save face among her betters. The air in the room grew thick, vibrating with the suffocating expectation of old money closing ranks to protect their golden boy. Marcus stepped down from the podium, his velvet jacket catching the light. He walked to the edge of the stage and looked down at Maya. His megawatt smile remained flawless for the cameras, but his eyes were dead, entirely devoid of sibling affection. He held the microphone out to her. Come on up here, Maya, Marcus urged, his tone perfectly modulating between encouraging and commanding. Say a few words. He thrust the sleek metal cylinder toward her. His lips were curled into a rigid, victorious smirk. He was expecting the surrender. He was waiting for the humiliating, stuttering capitulation of a woman who had finally realized she was out of her depth, out of her class, and completely out of options. Maya did not blush. She did not look down at her shoes. She did not tremble under the crushing weight of the crowd. Slowly, deliberately, Maya unbuttoned the single button of her obsidian jacket. She stepped onto the first marble stair, and the entire dynamic of the room began to warp. If a camera were tracking her movements, it would capture a woman moving with the fluid, terrifying grace of an apex predator invading a glass house. Her heels clicked rhythmically against the stone, cutting through the dying applause. The guests closest to the stage instinctively stepped back, clearing a wider path. They could feel the sudden freezing drop in the room's temperature. They could feel the raw, unadulterated power radiating from her. She did not walk like a woman who was about to yield. Chloe's breath hitched. She clutched her crystal flute so tightly her knuckles turned stark white. The triumphant smile vanished entirely from her face, replaced by a look of sheer, unmasked panic. She recognized the lethal calm in Maya's eyes from the courtyard in Buckhead. It was the look of a woman holding a lit match over a powder keg. Marcus's smirk faltered just a fraction of an inch as Maya ascended the stairs and stopped directly in front of him. He pushed the microphone closer to her chest. Just say yes, Marcus, hissed his voice, a razor-thin whisper, completely masked by the cheering crowd. Give the people what they want, Maya. Do it now, or I swear to God, I will use every connection in this room to ensure your little logistics company never gets another contract in this city. I will bury you. Maya stood absolutely still. The ballroom waited. The silence that followed the applause was deafening. It was the heavy, breathless anticipation that precedes a catastrophic avalanche. Maya did not look at the microphone. She looked out at the crowd. She saw the mayor checking his luxury watch. She saw the church elders looking at her with performative, sanctimonious pity. She saw Vivian looking up at her with a familiar cold embarrassment, silently demanding that her daughter just play her part and hand over the money to the favored son. And then she looked at Chloe. Chloe was vibrating with manic tension. She had already spent the $20,000 in her head. She was already imagining wiring it to her offshore bookies, buying herself another month of breathing room, another month of playing the flawless, untouchable socialite. The pressure in the room was designed to break ordinary people. It was designed to trigger the primal human instinct to conform, to submit, to survive the scrutiny of the pack. But Maya was not ordinary, and she had stopped seeking the approval of this particular pack a decade ago. Maya's hand moved. She did not take the microphone from Marcus. Instead, she reached past him, sliding her hand over the polished surface of the podium, and pressed her thumb against the biometric scanner of the encrypted hard drive she had placed there. A tiny glowing green light pulsed on the device. I think there has been a fundamental misunderstanding about why I am standing on this stage, Maya said. Her voice was not amplified by the microphone, but the room was so deathly quiet that her words carried with the sharp, cracking force of a whip. Marcus frowned, his facade slipping further. He aggressively shoved the microphone toward her face. Maya, just say the words. Do not make a scene in front of the mayor. Oh, I am not making a scene, Marcus, Maya replied softly. She finally reached up and wrapped her fingers around the microphone. She did not take it from his hand. She simply gripped the top of it, while he was still holding the base forcefully, angling it toward her own mouth. The physical contact was an electric, silent struggle of pure leverage. I am simply bridging the gap. She turned her gaze away from her brother and locked eyes with the audiovisual technician stationed in the shadows at the back of the ballroom. Elias had paid the man $5,000 in untraceable cash 2 hours before the gala started. The technician gave Maya a barely perceptible nod. My brother just told you that I am here to make a $20,000 contribution to his son's tuition. Maya's voice boomed through the massive concert speakers, instantly shattering the remaining tension in the room and replacing it with a deep, unsettling confusion. He told you this is a lesson in financial responsibility. I completely agree with him. Financial responsibility is the absolute cornerstone of trust. Vivian's smug expression dissolved into rigid confusion. She sat up straight, her manicured hands gripping the edges of the VIP table. Which is why Maya continued, her tone dropping into the cold, clinical cadence of a corporate litigator presenting a death penalty case when my holding company, Apex Holding, was approached to quietly purchase a block of defaulted debt in the Buckhead retail sector. I felt a familial obligation to review the toxic assets myself. The name Apex Holding hit Marcus like a physical blow to the sternum. His grip on the base of the microphone loosened. He staggered back half a step. The color drained from his face so fast he looked momentarily sick. Apex Holding, the apex predator of the Atlanta financial district, the phantom private equity firm that had been ruthlessly liquidating over-leveraged estates for the past 3 years. Let me show you what a $20,000 tuition payment actually looks like when you trace the routing numbers, Maya announced to the paralyzed room. Behind her, the massive 30-foot digital projection screen that had previously displayed the gala's elegant winter landscape abruptly went entirely black. A split second later, the screen flashed to life with a blindingly bright, high-resolution display of a bank statement. It was Jordan's trust fund ledger. The balance was 0. Gasps echoed from the front rows. The church elders leaned forward, squinting at the massive red numbers projected above the stage. The mayor's jaw dropped. This is the educational fund of my nephew Jordan. Maya's voice rang out, relentless and entirely devoid of mercy. A fund that was illegally liquidated 3 months ago. $150,000 withdrawn in a single afternoon by the man standing next to me. Marcus lunged forward, his hands grasping frantically for the microphone, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it bordered on complete madness. "Cut the sound! Turn off that screen! Turn it off right now!" He abandoned his polished persona entirely, shouting at the back of the room. But Maya effortlessly blocked him, her shoulder checking him back with brutal force as she maintained her iron grip on the microphone. The money did not go to Duke University. Maya stated, her voice easily overpowering Marcus's desperate shouting. The projection screen shifted, displaying a complex, undeniable web of wire transfers highlighted in harsh, glowing neon. The routing numbers pointed directly to Chloe's luxury boutique, and from there to a verified list of known offshore betting syndicates. Chloe let out a strangled, horrifying shriek. She covered her face with her hands, backing away from the fireplace, as the 300 guests turned their collective, horrified gaze upon her. Vivian dropped her champagne glass. It shattered against the marble floor, the sharp sound echoing like a gunshot through the silence of the ballroom. It went to cover $1.2 million in toxic, unsecured gambling debt incurred by my sister-in-law, Chloe Maya, declared, delivering the final fatal blow. Debt that is now entirely owned and currently being called in by my company. As of 1 hour ago, Apex Holding has initiated total asset seizure. Maya finally ripped the microphone entirely out of Marcus's hand. She turned to face her brother, who was gasping for air, clutching his chest as his entire world, his reputation and his freedom, burned to ashes in front of his eyes. "You wanted a lesson in financial responsibility," Marcus Maya said softly, the microphone picking up every lethal syllable. "Class is in session," Marcus snapped. The pristine veneer of the charismatic megachurch pastor shattered completely, exposing the desperate, cornered animal underneath. He lunged at her, his hands clawing frantically for the microphone. "Shut your mouth!" he roared, his voice cracking with a raw, guttural panic that echoed terribly through the silent ballroom. "Turn off that screen! Security! Get her off this stage right now!" But the security guards lining the perimeter of the room did not move a single muscle. They looked toward the mayor, who stood frozen in shock with his glass half raised, and then toward the stage, implicitly recognizing who actually held the absolute power in the room. Apex Holding was not a name to trifle with. It was the financial lifeblood of half the city's commercial real estate. Maya did not flinch. If anyone had looked closely into her dark eyes in that exact moment, they would have seen no triumph, no gloating joy, and no hesitation. They would have seen only the cold, mechanical precision of a surgeon completing a necessary amputation. She effortlessly blocked his advance, pivoting gracefully on her heel and keeping the microphone firmly locked in her grasp. "You told this room that Jordan was accepted into Duke University," Maya said. Her voice dropped to a dangerously quiet register, forcing every single person in the massive ballroom to lean forward in breathless silence. "You used your own son as a prop to extort money from me. You used a child's future to paint yourself as a savior. But that was just another layer of the illusion, wasn't it, Marcus?" Down by the stone fireplace, Chloe let out another wretched, broken sob, curling in on herself as the elite women of Atlanta physically stepped away from her, treating her like an active contagion. "You see," Maya continued, turning her gaze back to the captivated, horrified audience. "When my firm took over your debt portfolio, we conducted a comprehensive audit of all related assets, liabilities, and outstanding claims. I reached out directly to the admissions office at Duke University. I wanted to verify the exact $20,000 deposit requirement you so publicly demanded from me tonight. I wanted to make sure my nephew's future was secure." Marcus shook his head frantically, his mouth opening and closing without sound. The sweat beaded on his forehead, ruining his flawless complexion. "Jordan Wilson is not enrolled at Duke University," Maya stated. The words landed like heavy stones dropped onto a sheet of fragile glass. "He is not on the wait list. He is not in the system. His acceptance was officially rescinded 3 weeks ago because his father, the esteemed vice president of wealth management, could not afford to pay the basic enrollment deposit." A collective gasp rippled through the sea of state senators, venture capitalists, and socialites. The church elders, men who had trusted Marcus with their spiritual guidance and their substantial tithing funds, exchanged looks of profound disgust and rising anger. The lie about the money was a massive scandal. The lie about his own son's future using a non-existent college acceptance to solicit funds in front of the congregation was an unforgivable sin. You stood on this stage and asked these people to applaud. A phantom, Maya said, her voice laced with lethal, unyielding calm. You asked me to fund a ghost. You drained his entire college fund 8 months ago, $150,000 wiped out in a single afternoon to cover your wife's offshore gambling debts, and you thought you could simply lie your way through the spring semester. You thought you could publicly shame me into writing a check to cover your tracks. The projection screen behind her shifted again, prompted by the invisible technician Elias had planted in the sound booth. A high-resolution image of the official rescission letter from Duke University's admissions office appeared on the 30-foot display. The red stamp of cancellation glowed menacingly directly above Marcus's head. The document showed the missed deadlines, the unpaid fees, and the final termination of Jordan's hard-earned acceptance. It was undeniable, documented proof of Marcus's complete moral and financial bankruptcy. Down at the VIP table, Vivian Wilson slowly stood up. The formidable matriarch looked as though she had physically aged 2 decades in the span of 3 minutes. The heavy pearls around her neck suddenly looked like a noose. She stared at the massive screen, reading the rescission letter, and then looked at her golden boy. She looked at the favored son she had protected, the man she had allowed to demean and belittle Maya for years. Vivian opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The absolute devastation of her manufactured legacy paralyzed her. "This is a fabrication!" Marcus yelled, spinning around to face the crowd, his hands raised in a desperate, placating gesture. "This is an attack on my character. My sister has always been deeply unstable. She is jealous. She fabricated these documents to ruin me." His voice was shrill and frantic, completely lacking the resonant, commanding bass that had captivated the room just 10 minutes earlier. He looked small. He looked pathetic. Nobody believed a single word he was saying. The evidence was literally written in 10-foot-tall letters behind him, carrying official university letterheads and verified banking transfer codes. "There are 300 people in this room," Maya said, her voice ringing out with absolute chilling finality. "Every single one of you understands the value of due diligence. You know the exact legal weight of the documents displayed behind me. You know that Apex Holding does not make mistakes. Tomorrow morning, my legal team will file the formal seizure notices with the county clerk. The house in Buckhead, the cars, the remaining liquid assets, all of it belongs to my firm now. But tonight, I simply wanted to correct the record." She turned away from the crowd and looked directly into Marcus's terrified, bloodshot eyes. She stepped into his personal space, forcing him to shrink back against the podium. "I am not a charity case," Maya said softly, ensuring the microphone caught every razor-sharp syllable. "I am not a struggling courier in need of a handout. I am not the punchline to your jokes anymore. And I will never under any circumstances allow you to use my name to cover your failures again." Marcus stared at her, his chest heaving. The realization of his total destruction finally crushed the last remaining breath from his lungs. He had invited the most powerful people in the state to witness his triumph, and instead he had provided them with front-row seats to his absolute annihilation. Maya reached over and switched off the microphone. The sharp click signaled the end of the execution. She did not wait for a response. She did not look at her mother, nor did she spare a glance for Chloe, who was now weeping openly on the marble floor. Maya simply turned her back on the stage, walked down the stairs, and glided effortlessly through the parted sea of silent, awestruck guests, leaving the ruins of the Wilson Empire smoldering behind her. She had barely made it 10 paces toward the grand mahogany doors when a shrill, ragged scream tore through the dead silence of the ballroom. "Liar." The word echoed off the vaulted ceilings, desperate and unhinged. Maya stopped. She did not flinch, nor did she rush. She turned around with the agonizing, deliberate slowness of a predator whose prey had just foolishly drawn attention to itself. Chloe had broken away from the VIP table and was stumbling toward the center of the room. Her metallic silver gown, which had looked so regal just 20 minutes ago, now seemed like a ridiculous costume. Her elaborate waves of hair were disheveled, and the heavy contouring on her face could not hide the blotchy, panicked red flushing her cheeks. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at Maya's back. "You are a liar!" Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking as she desperately scanned the faces of the socialites around her, begging for someone to intervene. "My business is thriving. Chloe's Couture is an institution in Buckhead. It is worth millions of dollars. You are just a bitter, jealous dropout trying to humiliate us because you have nothing." Maya tilted her head, observing the frantic woman with clinical detachment. The crowd held its collective breath. At the back of the room, Elias, reading Maya's silent cue, typed a single command into his encrypted tablet. The massive projection screen behind the stage flashed a brilliant, blinding white, momentarily washing out Marcus, who was still slumped over the podium. When the glare faded, the screen displayed a new set of documents. These were not offshore betting ledgers. These were official state-stamped corporate tax filings, eviction notices, and vendor lawsuits. Maya walked slowly back toward the center of the ballroom. The elite guests scrambled backward, ensuring there was a wide, clear radius between the two women. "You are right about one thing," Chloe, Maya said. Her voice was not raised, but it possessed a terrifying acoustic clarity that penetrated every corner of the room. "Your boutique was an institution. It was a monument to vanity and terrible financial management. But it is certainly not worth millions. In fact, its net valuation currently sits at negative $1.2 million. Chloe shook her head violently, covering her ears as if she could physically block out the truth. "No, we have investors. We have inventory." "You have vendor liens?" Maya corrected, her tone devoid of any empathy. "You have unpaid suppliers in Milan, Paris, and New York. You have 6 months of back rent owed to your commercial landlord. Elias, show them the cash flow." The screen morphed into a devastatingly simple bar graph, tracking the boutique's revenue against its massive hemorrhaging expenses. Then a red arrow traced the path of a wire transfer directly from Marcus's personal accounts. "You used your own son's college fund to pump into your wife's bankrupt fashion boutique," Maya said, looking directly at Marcus, who was staring at the screen in mute horror. "You used Jordan's $150,000 to artificially inflate the accounts, desperately trying to keep the lights on so you could maintain the illusion of success for your country club friends. You sacrificed his future so you could keep playing dress-up." A wave of revulsion swept through the crowd. The wives of the church elders, women who had frequently shopped at Chloe's boutique and praised her impeccable taste, now looked at her with unvarnished disgust. The absolute taboo of high society was not losing money, but being exposed as a fraud who stole from their own blood to maintain a facade. "That is a lie," Chloe sobbed, her voice losing its defensive edge and descending into raw panic. She looked wildly at Marcus for support, but her husband was paralyzed, his eyes locked on the undeniable proof of his financial crimes. "You cannot prove any of this. It is a private company. You do not have access to my ledgers." Maya offered a brief, chilling smile. It was a smile devoid of warmth, a sharp curve of lips that signaled absolute victory. "I do not need to steal access to your ledgers," Chloe, Maya said. "I own them." Chloe froze. The air seemed to evacuate her lungs entirely. "Did you really think the collection agencies were just being patient with you?" Maya asked, taking one step closer to her trembling sister-in-law. "Did you think your commercial landlord suddenly developed a charitable heart? They did not. Your debt was quietly bundled and sold off 3 weeks ago. And do you know who bought it?" Maya did not wait for an answer. She raised her hand and the massive screen behind the stage shifted one final time. It displayed a high-resolution photograph taken in the daylight. It was an image of the pristine glass storefront of Chloe's Couture on Peachtree Road. But the elegant gold lettering of the boutique's logo was partially obscured by heavy steel padlocks wrapped around the handles. Plastered directly in the center of the glass door was a bright fluorescent yellow legal document. "Did you know Apex Holding just bought your $1.2 million debt?" Maya announced, her voice ringing with the finality of a gavel striking a judge's block. Because I am the CEO of Apex. I am your sole creditor. And I do not extend grace periods to people who steal from children. Chloe let out a whimpering gasp, her eyes glued to the photograph of her ruined kingdom. The foreclosure papers and the seizure order were pasted on your boutique's glass doors at exactly 5 o'clock this afternoon, Maya said, delivering the fatal blow with flawless precision. Your inventory, your fixtures, the very brand name you spent years building, it all belongs to my firm now. You are entirely, irreversibly bankrupt. The impact of the revelation hit Chloe with physical force. Her knees buckled. The silver fabric of her gown crumpled around her as she collapsed onto the polished marble floor. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders heaving with loud, uncontrollable sobs. There was no glamour left, no haughty superiority. She was nothing more than a ruined woman, weeping in the center of a ballroom surrounded by people who would never associate with her again. Vivian Wilson, watching the complete destruction of her favored son's family, clutched her chest. The matriarch looked as though she might faint, her eyes darting frantically between Maya's imposing figure and the massive digital evidence of her family's ruin. All the years she had spent degrading Maya, praising Marcus, and elevating Chloe had culminated in this singular, catastrophic public execution. Maya looked down at Chloe, weeping on the floor, then shifted her gaze back up to Marcus on the stage. He was gripping the podium, his knuckles white, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. The polished, charismatic leader of the Fellowship Cathedral had been reduced to a trembling shell. You built an empire on an illusion, Marcus, Maya said, her voice echoing one last time through the devastated silence of the Piedmont Country Club. But illusions shatter the moment they meet the truth. And the truth is, you have nothing left. Maya turned her back on her shattered family for the final time. She did not look back as she resumed her walk toward the grand mahogany doors. The crowd of state senators, investors, and socialites parted instantly, leaving a wide, respectful avenue for her to exit. They did not see a blue-collar worker or a bitter sister. They saw the undisputed apex predator of their city, and they watched in terrified silence as she walked out into the freezing winter night. As Maya turned her back on the stage, the paralyzing shock that had held the ballroom hostage finally snapped. The silence shattered into a chaotic uproar of panicked shouts, gasping breaths, and frantic movement. The dominoes Marcus had so carefully stacked over his entire career were not just falling, they were violently disintegrating. Maya walked down the center aisle, her pace measured and unhurried. Around her, the most powerful people in Atlanta were scrambling to distance themselves from the radioactive crater of the Wilson family. State senators aggressively waved their aides over, demanding immediate press releases to sever any public association with the church elders. At the tables closest to the stage, Marcus's most prominent venture capital partners were already barking orders into their cell phones. Cancel the wire transfers immediately. A billionaire real estate developer shouted into his phone, his face pale with fury as he stared at Marcus. Freeze every single asset tied to Wilson Wealth Management. Call legal right now. Pull out of the Buckhead deal. On the stage behind her, the gravity of his total ruin finally crushed Marcus. His legs simply gave out beneath him. The polished, charismatic vice president collapsed onto his hands and knees on the hardwood floor, his head bowed in absolute defeat. But Chloe did not mourn with him. The realization that Marcus had stolen their son's college fund to temporarily plug the massive hole in her failing business, only to drag them both into a lethal trap set by Maya, ignited a manic, feral rage. Chloe scrambled up the stage steps, the hem of her expensive silver gown tearing beneath her heels. She launched herself at her husband. She shrieked like a wild animal, striking his chest and shoulders, her manicured nails desperately clawing at his bespoke velvet jacket. "You ruined us!" she screamed, her voice completely unhinged, abandoning every ounce of her carefully crafted country club decorum. "You arrogant fool! You ruined everything!" Down at the primary VIP table, Vivian Wilson watched her golden family tear each other apart. The matriarch clutched the heavy pearls at her throat, gasping for air as her chest tightened with a sharp, agonizing pressure. Her knees buckled beneath her. She slumped heavily against the table, sending crystal glasses and expensive silverware crashing to the floor. Vivian looked up, her vision blurring, staring at the retreating back of the daughter she had outcast, mocked, and rejected. The realization hit Vivian with the force of a physical blow. Maya, the supposed blue-collar disappointment, was the undisputed master of the Wilson legacy. She held the power of absolute life and death over the entire family, and she had exercised it without a single ounce of mercy. Maya did not stop to watch them bleed. She did not turn her head to witness the pathetic ruin of the people who had made it their mission to destroy her self-worth. She reached the end of the grand ballroom and stopped beside a stunned waiter. Maya placed the microphone down onto his silver tray. The sharp metallic clack rang out a definitive period at the end of a long, painful sentence. Maya kept her chin high, her obsidian suit absorbing the ambient light as she pushed through the heavy mahogany doors of the Piedmont Country Club. The freezing winter air hit her face, crisp, sharp, and intensely clean. It was the air of total liberation. The valet, having witnessed the terrifying display of power through the glass doors, practically sprinted to open the rear door of her matte black Maybach. Maya slid into the plush leather seat, sinking into the quiet sanctuary of the vehicle. Elias glanced at her from the driver's seat through the rearview mirror. A small, approving smirk played on his lips. "It is done," Maya said softly. She gave him a single nod. The heavy engine purred to life. As the armored car pulled away, gliding smoothly down the long, circular driveway, Maya looked out the tinted window one last time. She left the country club behind her, a smoldering monument to her family's greed and hubris. She leaned back against the headrest, a genuine smile finally touching her lips, and rode off into the empire she had built entirely with her own two hands.